Okay. I see we've added Derek, Eric, John Gogan, Len, and Dennis. So I believe we have a quorum. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to call the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization Board of Directors, Administration and Finance Committee meeting to order for October 6, 2022. I'll go ahead and read the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. You can also include pronouns if you so choose. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking, please. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button at the bottom in the toolbar. The chair, which is me, will then call on participants in the order in which hands are raised. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Mr. Jonathan Church via the chat box at jchurch@ctps.org or 857-702-3709. I'm now going to read the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is also accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation to fully participate in this meeting, please contact Mr. Jonathan Church via the chat box, via email at jchurch@ctps.org, or by calling 857-702-3709. Thank you. We'll now do introductions. As I said earlier, good morning. My name is Brian Kane. I'm the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board and Chair of the Administration and Finance Committee. And I will call upon members. Actually, Jonathan, do you mind doing the roll call for me?
Not at all. Mass DOT, Derek Cravat.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Derek Cravat, Manager of MPO Activities in MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning.
MAPC, Eric Barassa.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council, Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here.
And Metro West Regional Collaborative, Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, Metro West Region.
That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. And again, thank you everyone for being here. Okay. And thanks to all the CTPS staff for being here as well. To save a little bit of time, we're not going to go through staff introductions, but please know that we welcome you and appreciate your participation. We're now going to move on to public comments. If there's any member of the public or anyone at all who would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand function. And we would be delighted to hear your comment or question at this time. I should also note that if you have written comments, you can provide a copy to staff and they will be shared with everyone via email to Mr. Jonathan Church at jchurch@ctps.org if you are able. I don't see any hands raised, so at this point we will close the public comment session. If anybody does have any questions or comments throughout the meeting, we will be happy to take those on a particular item if time avails. Thank you. Action item 3, the summary of the August 4th, 2022 meeting. I wonder if any member of the committee would like to make a motion, and then if there's a second to approve the meeting summary.
I'll
which
make a
is
motion to
provided.
approve.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second?
Second, Derek Cravat.
Thanks, Derek. Derek. Jonathan, can you please call the roll?
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes,
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes. Yes.
and Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
I would also note that Bill Conroy has just arrived. I believe he's also a member of the group, of the committee.
Welcome, Bill. Do you want to say hello? You can unmute yourself and say hello if you want, Bill.
He
Okay.
is unmuting himself. I don't know if there's an audio issue, but
Well, Bill, we welcome your participation when you're able to do that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the action item, which is the operations plan, officers of the board. Logan, do we have something to show on screen here? Excellent, thank you. So to my fellow committee members, this has been shared, and I thank you all for your comments. We are starting to really make some progress here, putting some material on the scaffolding that is the operations plan. And I think starting with officers of the board and their roles and responsibilities is a good point. And are you going to show the kind of discussion questions, Logan, or do you want me to do that, or how do we want to do this? Maybe Tegan, you can help me out here.
Yeah, so this one, first we're going over the officers of the board, which is actually a more final version that incorporated the last few edits that I think we received from MassDOT, which Logan can touch on. The discussion questions, and this is actually, I think, a little confusing, my apologies, but we also have the worksheet available for just the roles of board members generally, and that has the discussion questions with it.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Okay, so unless there's any real need for discussion, I think we can take this as nearly fully baked. The important pieces here are that this operations plan with respect to officers recognizes what is in the memoranda of understanding. I know there's been some discussion about the MOU and its merits or lack thereof. But regardless of that, it is a document that we are bound to at this time. And we have to take up the topic of discussing and amending the MOU as part of this operations plan because it speaks to itself. But at this point, the chair of the MPO board is the Secretary of Transportation of MassDOT. And what we say here is that their chair begins on their first day as secretary. And as the secretary will preside, and as we've discussed, they can appoint a designee, and that the designee then will chair meetings for the secretary as the secretary's representative, and various and sundry other things. If we can just scroll down a little bit here. We also have the topic of vice chair, which, as we've discussed, presides in the meetings, presides at meetings when the chair or the chair's designees are not available, and they collaborate on setting the agenda. We had a long discussion about this, and it's really, we're putting some language in here to ensure that the vice chair really has the responsibility to bring MPO board members issues and ensure that they get on the agenda. So that is something that we are adding in here, which is great. And it's really been a practice that's already been in existence, but we're just sort of clarifying it and putting it in writing. And then we also have added some language that any member, in addition to the vice chair, can request that things be added to the agenda if there is a majority vote of MPO Board of Director members. And then we finally go down here a little bit, Logan. We get to the process of nominating the vice chair, which is something that we've discussed at length. And the MOU makes it clear that it has to be a municipal representative or a member of a regional body. And so we add that language in here to make sure that it is codified. And we also go through the process of setting up when the elections will take place, which is also in the MOU. And this just makes it a little more clear. And then finally, if we can just go down, we make reference here to the annual meeting, which is something we've talked about, and the need to kind of have an annual meeting where the principals will participate, including the secretary and as many of the chief elected officials as possible. And that's where we also put some dates around in the operations plan, which makes reference in the MOU. And then with respect to who will preside, even though it's been discussed, we talk about obviously the secretary is the chair, and the chair can appoint a designee or an alternate. They will preside at the meeting, and if not, then the vice chair will assume the presiding role. And then we make reference to the fact that if neither the chair or the vice chair are available, the board membership may elect a presiding officer for that meeting by majority vote. I think it's fair to say that that is a very unlikely scenario, but nevertheless, the operations plan exists in some cases to try to anticipate unlikely scenarios. And then if we could just go down to agenda setting. So this is something that's also been referenced. We talk about how the vice chair is sort of responsible. And this just codifies sort of how it works now with CTPS staff bringing forward things that are ready to go, as well as stuff that the vice chair sort of represents for the membership, stuff that the chair believes should be brought forward, and kind of puts on a puts a little codification around what we already do in process here. And we also make reference to open meeting law. And then finally, section G here and H, which are G is just other officers. If we decide we need a second vice chair, we're giving ourselves the option to do that. I don't see that happening. And then we get to the question of designees and alternates, just making it clear that it is the chief elected official of a municipality or the chief executive of a municipality, of a regional entity or state agency that is the member, and that they may appoint a designee to act for them on the board. The chief executive officer, however, maintains the membership and has precedence. And we try to put some language around here around how the designees will be appointed. We're asking for letters of sort of credentialing to just make it clear that if Jane Doe shows up and says they speak for any municipality and we don't know who that individual is, we should have a process by which that person can be identified and we can ensure that they actually do have the ability to speak for that municipality. And in the unlikely event that there ever were sort of conflicting two folks showing up claiming to represent an agency, a body, a town, we need to have a procedure in place to sort of identify who that is and ensure that that person actually speaks for the chief executive officer of that entity, which is the actual member of the board. So this clears that up and spells it out a little more clearly. Let's keep going here, Logan, please. I think that's it. Yep. Okay, and so that is our first sort of section of the MOU, of the operations plan that we're trying to pull together with respect to officers of the board, as well as designees, members, and alternates. So I guess I would just open this up to my fellow committee members at this time for any sort of final questions or comments on this section. And if not, I'm going to take this as sort of fully baked to the extent that it can be as a section of a larger document. And then we can move on to our next section. And this will be amended or changed as we go forward by staff, especially with respect to numbering, page numbering, things like that. Those sort of administrative things that have to go into any sort of large document like this. But for the most part, I think we can take most of this language as nearly fully baked. Tegan.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think one thing I just wanted to add for context is that this particular section references the election of the vice chair in an annual meeting, and I just think it's worth highlighting that would be happening this month. And so this month, we're going to move forward with our prior process where we won't have what we'll call an annual meeting, but we'll sort of do the usual. We'll have the vice chair be nominated at a meeting and there'll be a vote at the meeting. But in future years, once this is fully established and approved by the board, we would start following that process. The other thing I wanted to bring up that I think was a question that we haven't quite resolved yet, which we can resolve in parallel as we move forward, is I think somebody put in a comment that asked for a better definition of what a resolution is. When it says up what the chair would sign, it says like letters, resolutions, and then the usual 3C documents. So that might be something that we explore defining a bit better as we move along through the process, because we've had a few of those and there's been a little discussion around what that actually is and what the process is. So we'll make a note to continue thinking about the definition of a resolution as well.
Thank you for those clarifications. And I should also note that as we go through the rest of the operations plan, things will be discussed and amended that might reference this section, and obviously those changes will be retroactive. We're going to try to maintain consistency throughout the entire document, but it doesn't make sense necessarily to go back and have this committee agree to change every word, every piece of grammar. So just know that we will, for continuity's sake, continue everything, and everything will hopefully line up at the very end. I see we've been joined by some folks. Welcome, everyone. If any member of anybody has any questions or comments, now is a good time to take them. Members of the committee, I'll take first, and then anybody else who would like to comment. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think this all looks good to me. I think, you know, the just being clear on how these things are operationalized is great. And I fully support this.
Thanks, Eric. Anybody else? Anybody from the public, CTPS, anybody? We really do welcome your comments. I know this is a little in the weeds and a bit bureaucratic, but that's what operations plans are. And we need to sometimes get a little much like this. Bill Conroy.
Just one question. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Going into an election, which we are, does this subsequently have any change to the document, or because things may or may not change going forward?
I'm not sure I follow your question, Bill. Do you mind?
So
me out?
if in fact we do have a new secretary after the election in November, and some changes there, how's that read? Does the document just stand whoever's in place?
Right. No, that's a good point. So the operations plan and the MOU make clear that the secretary serves ex officio by virtue of their office. And so once the new Secretary of Transportation takes office and is employed as an employee of the Commonwealth, they will automatically become the new chair of the Boston Region MPO. And then we will have to go through a credentialing process with them. But Tegan, why don't you say it much more eloquently than I ever could?
No, I think that was right. I was thinking, Bill, that you might be looking at or asking about a slightly different thing, and I'm not sure, which is, will we amend this as a new administration and potentially a new secretary take office? Are you asking whether this could then change in general, like the content of the operations plan?
No,
Okay.
I'm more, Brian was right on that.
Okay.
Just the individuals in place. So I think you don't need to have any addendum attached to this whatsoever, because the language, as Brian just pointed out, states that. So that's fine.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll also just highlight that this operations plan won't go to the board or be approved by the board until early the next calendar year. So this will continue to evolve as the new administration also takes their seats.
And I just want to state, not that that's going to happen. I'm just putting that out there. So.
No, completely understood,
Okay.
Bill, and it's a good
Thank you.
question, and we try to anticipate all scenarios in these things, and you can never anticipate everything, so
Right.
it's clear that we will have to come back and make some amendments going forward, but the big first step is getting something written down, and yeah, those transitions are always awkward, and there will be a period of transition, no matter what happens in the election in a couple weeks. But we'll muddle through as we have. Any other questions, comments, concerns from anybody? I don't see anyone raising their hand. Okay, so I'm gonna take this then as consensus of the committee to sort of move it forward. And I guess Tegan?
I'm so sorry for jumping in so much. We had put on the agenda that there would be a vote by this committee to show that consensus. We don't have to follow that process going forward, just so you know. We can have it just be a general discussion. But I just wanted to highlight that on the agenda for today, we did say that there would be a vote to sort of demonstrate that consensus. But it's not yet going to the board at this point.
Well, far be it from me to ever go against an agenda, and thank you for keeping me honest and on the right path here. So Logan, do you mind scrolling up to the very top of the document, just so we can get the nomenclature correct? I guess, is there a motion and a second to approve the draft operations plan officers of the board section as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Derek. Jonathan, you want to call the roll?
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Yes.
and Bill Conroy.
Yes.
That calls the roll, Mr. Chair. Motion unanimous.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, everyone. This is a big first step, and one that I think will help move us forward, give us some momentum. Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which is a discussion of board member roles for non-officers. And Logan, I think this is where you're going to put up the discussion questions. Ah, very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, so as discussed before, there's a few questions here. Some of these are rhetorical, some of these are things we should discuss. We don't necessarily have to discuss all of them, but all of this is in the context of things the MOU states that could be or should be better defined. Things like representing the region. If a member is elected ex officio, for a sub-region or an organization like mine, which is supposed to represent the region, what does that really mean? Things like the election process. How should folks communicate with one another? If there's offsite meetings, how does that work? Who goes? Who has to go? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really just trying to better define what's in the MOU. I think the MOU can be described at times as aspirational and not necessarily informational. And so we're trying to be as informational as possible. And so Logan, do me a favor, go scroll up here for a second, just so we can sort of see. There you go. So what we're trying to get here is stuff from the MOU. What does an MPO board member or designee, what are their roles and responsibilities? We've also discussed, I think, the need for a code of conduct. We need to sort of discuss, how does a member represent their community and their sub-region? What if there are items that are potentially conflicts there? What if there's a project that a town in a sub-region wants, but a town in another town, in a budding town who happens to have the seat at the time representing the sub-region doesn't want? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess what we should do here is take these kind of one by one, and we want to pay special attention to the 2019 certification review parts. There it is there. So clarifying the roles, what is the role for staff? What is the role for MAPC, which sort of is the fiduciary agent and administers the subregions? What's the role for MassDOT, especially with respect to collaboration, communication, work assignments? And then also, what, if any, training or orientation material should be provided to new members or continuing education to current members with respect to that. So why don't we start? You can scroll down there, Logan. Why don't we start? Why don't we start with that? So I will kind of begin the discussion by saying I remember when I first started attending these meetings. It was in a very different context, but I do remember feeling a little bewildered. And I think it's fair to say that newer members, especially those who are doing it for the first time, might feel a little disoriented, or unoriented is probably a better way to say it. And so I guess what I would ask my fellow committee members and really anyone is, are there orientation materials that we can and should provide? Are there not necessarily trainings, because those can get really wonky, but you know what, that's my opinion. Are there trainings that we should go through for new members? And what, if any, information should new members be given? And I guess I would also ask, for those of you that are on other boards and commissions, and I think that's all of us, what have you seen that works really well when you first started, that made you sort of feel welcome and able to engage on day one? Mr. Leonard Diggins, sir.
Thanks, Ryan. With the acceptance and the encouragement that we do all we can to provide more information to people, there is always going to be this disorientation when you join something new of this size, and this level of importance. Partly the extent to which people move past that is a function of their personalities. But what I would say would help everyone is to make it really clear to them that the staff is really there to support and help and answer any questions, and they really are. It's not like we have to build a staff that is responsive and is willing to help, but maybe we just need to emphasize more. Maybe even weekly. It's like, if you have any questions after the meeting, the staff is available. There was a time when there were formal office hours. I think they would discontinue because people just weren't utilizing them. But if we just make it clear that staff is available anytime, call them, email them, and they'll help you out. It might go a long way towards helping the newer members, even us older ones, because a lot of times I won't ask questions during meetings, believe it or not, because I feel that I can have a longer conversation with staff at some point. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So two thoughts that come to mind with regard to training materials, I think in this instance could be something like frequently asked questions, or something like case studies of kind of success stories of times the MPO has done things that may have been championed by a board member, to kind of bring the process to life for new board members. So it's not just like an esoteric description of the 3C transportation planning process, which I think is still important. But I think that having kind of those real world examples and frequently asked questions that are actually about the implications of MPO meetings, like using that one you mentioned kind of in the introduction as an example, like what happens if there's competing priorities in a subregion, how do different towns coordinate, things like that. What does it mean to be on the MPO? How does that affect project initiation or advancing specific projects, things like that. So those are two kind of formats that come to mind are just like FAQs and case studies as maybe potential materials that could be developed to help onboard members.
Awesome, thanks. Mr. Ken Miller.
Good morning. Thank you, Brian.
You just appeared there, Ken. It was very dramatic.
What was that?
You just sort of appeared there from the darkness. It was very, very apropos for October.
I tried. Anyway, well, two things regarding the training. I think it might be helpful to think about what are the subject areas that an MPO member needs to know about, and then tailor training. You know, we in Federal Highway, we have for new employees in certain disciplines. We have, for example, we have a financial manager boot camp. And I'm not suggesting boot camp is scary. I don't suggest that the MPO adopt that word, but you know, what are the things that MPO members, it's not clear to me, for example, that MPO members have ever gotten any kind of training in how federal funding works. What does it mean? You know, what are the different categories? What are, you know, when we talk about CMAQ or STP, well, STPG, or, you know, or whatever, and obligational authority and all this stuff, and targets, you know, which is, you know, a state process really, but, you know, how does funding work? I mean, that's probably a major subject area that's not clear to me that MPO members get a great understanding because of, and I don't know if everybody agrees with that or not. And there are available courses. You know, we have, you know, NHI has a course called Federal Aid 101, for example. There are available training opportunities that the MPO could either adapt or even utilize more fully. I did have a question just to go back to the first bullet item, if I may, Brian.
Of course.
You know, representing the region. I just had a sort of a background question, and maybe this is a question for Eric. I don't know, but it's so how often do the subregions meet? You know, now that we have an election whatever it's, an election process or a court, whatever it is, where subregions sort of you know, select their representatives. I just have a question about, you know, what is the background? How often do subregions meet? Do typically the MPO members attend subregions? I mean, you know, does MPO? I know MAPC obviously, you know, attends subregional meetings. I just don't know if CTBS attends subregional meetings. I just don't even, you know, maybe some background about some of that might be helpful in terms of how to represent a region and how to get information, you know, because Brian, you made a very good point. What if there are two communities that don't agree on something? How does that, you know, does the subregion have the right to direct the vote of the representative, for example? I would say no, but people may have different opinions on that,
Right,
you know,
right.
I mean, you know, who knows, right? So,
Good, very good points, Ken. Very good points.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I respond?
Yeah, Eric, please. I was going to call on you.
Yeah, so for this, you know, the subregions meet about monthly. They usually don't meet like in maybe July or August. And the, you know, the MPO staff comes out, you know, several times over the course of the year to talk about the development of the UPWP, the TIP, when we're doing a long range plan. It depends on the subregion, the sort of the attendance of the MPO member. Some of them attend every meeting and some of them only attend a few. And I think there's definitely a role, I think, in the operations plan to use the subregions, I think, to address some of these things. And I think if we could, you know, be clear about like what the expectation of the member is and vis-a-vis coordinating with the subregions and the other communities, I think that would be great. So I agree with you, Ken. I think there's a role here. And I just think being clear about like what that expectation is in this document would be very helpful.
Thanks, Eric. And let's also, I think Ken raises some really good points around federal funding. We've talked before in this committee about sort of how a bill becomes a law process. I always like to go back to conjunction junction whenever possible. you know, figuring out sort of how we get from A to B to C to D to E to F. And also, I think this document itself will be very helpful in spelling out sort of on a month-by-month basis what the MPO board does. And that in and of itself will help new members. But let's keep going. Tegan, your hand was up first. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so very briefly on the sub-regional meetings, I think that is a great thing to bring up. And like, for example, today we'll talk about all the upcoming sub-regional meetings and I'll make a pitch for board members to attend. So I really like the idea of operationalizing that. And then going back to the training and the kind of 101 type stuff, this is a wonderful time to be hearing from you all about this, because one of our target activities in our strategic plan this year is to sort of revamp how we are onboarding board members. And we have a number of orientation materials and sort of a 101 set up, but we would like to sort of build on that and adjust it. And also, Ken, you talked about boot camps. We've been thinking about additional, maybe like modules that make sense, like as we're approaching a tip season, getting like a more in-depth summary or overview for the board members who are interested on how all of those things work and what the funding sources are and like what they're going to be deciding on. So please keep that input coming as part of this conversation or otherwise, because that is something that we are thinking about and we're happy to operationalize what we can in this document.
That's great. Thank you. Derek, I think you were next.
Yep, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I had a question on that as well, but just about the NHI training, having taken that before and having found it really beneficial. I think it's also something that a lot of other MPO board members would be interested in as well, statewide. And just, I wonder, I know that it's, you know, there's a fee for it. So it's a training that does cost money. I think it's like $500 something per person. So I'm curious if we do have some kind of scale or, you know, a large number of individuals taking it, if there could be a way to have support for that through, you know, like our SBR work program at MassDOT, or if that's something that we could kind of pay for separately, or if the onus of that should be on individual municipalities. But just kind of wondering about that, and maybe Ken, we should chat offline, or staff should chat offline, but just wanted to ask logistically if that's some, you know, an avenue we should pursue further is looking into MPO, the Federal Aid 101 trainings for MPO board members. Because I think that's something that would be of broad interest to a lot of folks. Just wanted to clarify how we might go about paying for that or organizing it and getting that on the books. But
Very good point,
I'll
Derek.
throw that out there. Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Go ahead, Len.
So when it comes to understanding how things work, we have really 3 great documents that are produced by the MPO, being the UPWP, the TIP, and the LRTP. And if one were to go through those documents, one would understand fully how the MPO works, and in the process, especially a newer member, they would end up with questions, and they could ask the staff. I think a recommendation for understanding what really goes on in the MPO and their responsibilities would maybe be for the staff during the boot camp, or whatever we call it, to just systematically go through those documents, explain how they are produced, and what the expectations are for the board members in helping to produce those documents. And certainly when it comes to selecting projects, understanding how the criteria work, and how we came up with them and how they work in terms of making decisions would go a long way towards helping members during that selection period in the early part of the year. Thank you.
That's great, Len. Thank you. You're absolutely right. The information is there. It's just a question of making it available and collating it and being able to answer questions. So Tegan and Jonathan, Logan, everybody, can I sort of ask you to, for the next time we get together, think about an orientation type onboarding thing. I know you mentioned you're going through this process now, Tegan, that's great. Let's find, let's try to codify in this plan, that there will be some sort of an orientation either online or in person. I know Eric had to step away, but it's something that I'm sure MAPC would be happy to I'm happy to volunteer them to do it, and myself, I'll do it as well, with somebody from CTPS, just to make ourselves available, sort of. I hate to use the word mentor because I don't feel qualified to do that, but I think it would be nice to have someone to ask questions to. So I think onboarding should be a section in this part under members. And we don't have to necessarily get incredibly specific about what exactly we'll give them. But I do think we should call out the need to do it and put some timeline around it, sort of right after the election process. Dennis, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Just a point of reference, when I came on and I knew very little about the process or the responsibilities and so forth. And so when I came on board, I sat down with Tegan's successor, or predecessor rather, for about a half day, 3/4 of a day, and just kind of went through all of the different processes and funding mechanisms and so forth, and asked questions, and which I found to be very, very helpful. Kind of gave you a context. So when you went to a meeting and you heard specific concepts or funding mechanisms and so forth, you kind of had a frame of reference. So that I thought was a pretty deep dive of the explanation. And then you kind of, you're on the job training, so to speak, and ask questions and so forth as things come up. But I thought that to be good for me anyways, because like I said, I had a very low floor in knowledge. So I found that to be very helpful.
Thanks, Dennis. Tegan, please go ahead.
Yeah, Dennis, that is great to hear. We've actually, so I knew that happened because I was also a new board member roughly 7 years ago and had a similar kind of long conversation with Carl to sort of help my orientation to the process. And what we've done since then is sort of spread that out a bit. So we do have a 101 now where we invite existing and new board members in person, maybe virtually now. Things have slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, and we brought in more staff to go through the 101. So we've had the expert on the UPWP, the expert on the TIP, the expert on engagement, kind of provide some of that background. So we've actually pulled more staff into the process, so it's not as much of a one-on-one conversation, but that's still the process that we want to evolve to better meet people's needs. So I'm glad to know that particular process is really helpful. And I think what we want to do, what I hear coming out of that, is make sure that there's still that opportunity for kind of deeper, like one-on-one back and forth and question asking, which I agree with you was very valuable when I was onboarding.
Absolutely. Derek, I wonder if I could turn to you for a second. Other MPOs in the state, have you seen anything that looks like this or seems to work? Or separately, is there any merit to having not doing this just for the Boston region MPO, but for all new MPO members statewide or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to the first question, to be honest, I don't think there's a real formal process. I think it's mostly just staff kind of advising that what the process is and maybe providing 3C documents and things like that. But I don't get the sense that most MPOs have a formal process, or that there's a real kind of firm grasp on the process, honestly. So I think it would be beneficial to that end of having this be in place for all MPOs. I think it's something they would all be really interested in, and using this almost as a template or model for them to build off. It's something we've talked a lot about in our group, just having worked with a lot of the MPOs when there are new members. It's it's very clear that there's kind of that initial, like with anything, there's a learning curve, but I think having this would really help with that. So I can do some asking around though. I'm curious. There's a few that come to mind that I think I may have seen some kind of process in place. So I may reach out to some folks and see if there is anything, and let folks know what I find.
Thank you. Yeah, the more I think we can do around this together, the better. Dennis, is your hand up from before?
No, this is just a follow up with
Tegan,
if I could. What I liked about the process that Tegan described and I described is that you can tailor to the level of knowledge of the person, right? Like I came in and I knew nothing, so they really dumbed it down for me. But if somebody came in and had a good grasp but needed some, knowledge of certain areas, you can tailor it to that, as opposed to going to a formal education kind of template or something. So that's what I like about that process.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It makes sense if we can. And I think, Tegan, you mentioned modules and things like that. Whatever we can do to kind of meet the individual where they are is better. So I think we have consensus that we need to have some language in here around new member orientation, continuing education. As I said, I think the MOU, the operations plan itself will be very helpful in spelling out what happens when in terms of a calendar, and also figuring out sort of who does what and when and how and what a member's responsibilities are. And so with respect to member responsibilities, a lot of the other questions here to me seem to touch on sort of member conduct. And we've talked about a code of conduct, as I mentioned earlier. Things like do we have an attendance policy? Should members speak to the press, things like that. And so I know that a code of conduct can seem a little scary, little over the top, perhaps. But I'm just wondering if folks feel that there is a need for that, or I guess there hasn't been, that I've seen, an issue where we need to, where this has become an issue and a code of conduct has become necessary. But with that said, as we try to anticipate and get ahead of things, it's probably not a bad idea. So let me see if we could talk about that for a second. Tegan, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just if I can add a little bit of my perspective on this.
Please.
So I have a reference point right now of two very different code of conducts. One is for the AMPO board that I'm on, and one is for another NPO that I have as a reference. And they can be everything from very procedural, which is sort of like the kinds of things we're building into the operations plan, or they can be sort of more cultural and ethics focused. And so I find that really interesting. And I appreciate having sort of the kind of ethics and cultural focused one for the AMPO board, because it just sets the tone that this is the type of board that's going to work together, respect each other. It sort of speaks more to the intent of having a good forum for open and respectful discourse. And that's not because anybody right now is violating that, but it sort of, again, codifies that expectation around board members and sets that going into the picture. And then if folks aren't acting that way, it gives the chair or the vice chair an ability to sort of talk to the board member in reference to the code of conduct. So I find it really interesting. I don't think it would necessarily change anything about how the board operates right now, because, again, I don't, like you said, Brian, I don't think we have a big issue with that. But it could also push things like how to participate as a regional member of the board, and like what that means to act in a regional way to try to put the regional goals at this like sort of place. So I'm not saying that I think this board absolutely needs it, but I think it's just useful to point out that there's very different kinds of codes of conduct, and that this committee could decide that one is more or less appropriate, or that it's just not needed because there's enough procedure built into the operations plan. Just wanted to put that out there.
No, that's very helpful, Tegan. Thank you for that context. And I wonder if one of the codes you mentioned, AMPO or whatever, is something that we could use as a template, perhaps. Dennis, I see your hand is up. Did you want to talk on this subject?
No, I'll lower it. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. We always welcome you. Go ahead, Len.
So my suggestion is that we weave what we want to get from the code of conduct, the elements of that into various aspects of our expectations or our desires for members of the board. Certainly I would advise phrasing it differently, because the code of conduct kind of implies an enforcement mechanism for bad conduct. And if we don't have that, then I kind of wonder about the ultimate usefulness of it. I mean, if something goes wrong, you know, and if we do get a bad actor, because I think generally a bad actor is just going to be problematic, I mean, until they are no longer part of the picture. And so then to have that out there and then not do anything, just makes it, reveals the emperor for what that person may be. You know, or actually, it reveals the policy for being the emperor with no real, at least enforcement clothing. But I really appreciate what we are going for with the code of conduct, and I think we should just try to integrate that into as many elements of our operations plan as we can. Thank you.
No, that's a good point, Len, and something that I'm certainly cognizant of. We don't want to put something out there that we're not going to implement or hold to. So perhaps instead of a code of conduct per se, it could be in this section, which is members' roles and responsibilities, and we could just clearly spell out that amongst the responsibilities for membership are showing up and participating fully, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I also think that with any of these things like this, the proverbial devil's in the proverbial details. Actually, the details wouldn't be proverbial. So I'm going to again turn to you, Jonathan and Tegan and Logan and Annette, everybody, and ask you to take a shot at coming up with a first draft of what member roles and responsibilities are based on what our current practices are. And then maybe, as I said, Tegan, anything that we can pull from existing templates that might be helpful. Let's put this in here and we can kind of react to something in front of us as opposed to something a little more ethereal. Bill, did you raise your hand? Oh, you lowered it. Do you want to make a comment anyway, Bill?
Yeah, just one comment on the code of conduct. I think, you know, as a group here, I think we're really good at what we do here, and we were really respectful for each other's opinion here. And I think I don't know if it's really necessary. I would definitely, if I had stepped out of bounds or someone else, maybe I would think a phone call would come, and I think you would just get from the phone call. I don't think, you know, but to that degree, and when I say that, young people or younger statesmen of the group, some people just don't know, so they don't know the format, and they might get into areas that we don't really get into. So sometimes those topics do come up. But I don't want to be, you know, writing a thesis on this. I'll defer it back to the Tegan and others. I mean, you know, every time I hear the word of conduct, I think of myself, so I kind of stay clear of that. So, but I just wanted to speak to it. But I would definitely, if I stepped out of bounds, I know where the phone calls would come from. So, you know, and, you know, we want to be free to say what we want to say, but, you know, we have to be respectful for other peers, and we have to be respectful of other municipalities. And, you know, and we do, and I myself represent the mayor, so I have to keep that in mind as well. So I think we, you know, putting something in writing just adds to a whole nother, I don't know. It's just something I wouldn't want to go.
I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Len, you have your hand up?
Sure, yeah, and I know we're getting late. I'm just going to be quick with three things. You know, one is that I would like to help to the extent possible with helping with the training stuff. So I think you said that you and Eric would help with that. And I don't necessarily mean that I want to be a part of that process, but when it comes to helping with training people, I'd be happy to do that. And I heard what Bill was saying earlier about the one-on-one. And I think, I see what Tegan's saying also about kind of spreading out the work by having a session. And I do think the one-on-one helps though, because there are a lot of times when you're in a group setting that you're someone like me, as I said, believe it or not, I do hold back on my questions, but when you're one-on-one, you just have that person with you. So you can spread that out, across staff, and maybe even with MPO board members. And that's at least my last point, is that maybe we can have MPO board members be also not so much a formal buddy system, but certainly with the sub-regions, maybe outgoing, sub-region board member could help with getting the new member from that sub-region up to speed. I mean, and nothing like teaching to help you learn or motivate you to learn. I mean, and then it creates that connection with the person. So that's it. Thank you.
Here, here. Well said, Len. Okay, so I'm going to try to move us on here. I think we've given a good amount of feedback and direction to staff, and obviously we'll follow up. So let's go to our next agenda item, which is member items. Are there any member items from anybody on the committee? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Wait, did I miss anything?
May I just,
Next meeting, next
Yeah.
meeting, next meeting. Thank
I
you.
was just going to highlight the next meeting will be before the October 20th meeting, unless we need to shift anything around based on other committees. It will be a administration and finance focused meeting, not an operations plan meeting. So we will go through and sort of make these updates to this worksheet and reframe questions and have more write-up for you to respond to by the November, whatever the meeting is, the first, I think it's November 3rd. That'll be the next conversation about this. But please
Great.
come to the October 20th one. Very important. It's our quarterly conversation about administration and finance.
Dollars and cents. Yes. Thank you, Tegan. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, second.
Without objection, we are adjourned. See y'all in 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.